I've always found the water comforting. When I lived in LA, I would try to go to the beach whenever I could and freeride. Something about being here just made the ideas flow freely. As I sit here now, I can't help but reflect on myself, where I'm at in life, where I'd like to be, acknowledging my wins, but also coming to terms with my failings. And as I sit here, letting this melancholy symphony of hopes and regrets wash over me, I can't help but ask one question. What's going on with Ubisoft? So, if you're new here, I'm currently in my year of the backlog, where I'm not buying any new games and exclusively beating the games I already own. So the two games we're getting into today are Star Wars Outlaws and Avatar, Frontiers of Pandora. But before we look at the current state of Ubisoft through those two games, let's first talk about how we got here in the first place. So throughout the 90s and first couple years of the 2000s, Ubisoft mostly focused on Rayman games and a butt ton of licensed titles. As we got deeper into the PS2 Xbox generation, Ubisoft would start to come into its own as a publisher. While Rayman was still crushing it and they were still pushing licensed games like nobody's business, the success of both the Prince of Persia games and Tom Clancy brand would charted the company on a course where their focus was largely on their own IP. When we got to the 360 generation, Ubisoft threw the gauntlet down early with a game that would come to define them for the next decade. I'm speaking, of course, of Assassin's Creed. The impact Assassin's Creed had on open world games cannot be understated. Before Assassin's Creed, every open world game was basically trying to be a GTA killer, which had you doing crime in an open world. Assassin's Creed basically set the template for what open world games would be throughout the 360 PS3 generation, and honestly well into the PS4 generation. After Assassin's Creed and subsequently Far Cry 3, the Ubisoft formula was widely adopted by the industry at large. The open world genre became the default for AAA games, with many of the mechanics introduced in Far Cry and Assassin's Creed becoming the standard. While the rough launch of Assassin's Creed Unity did them no favors, they generally got through the PS4 era pretty smoothly, even successfully revamping the Assassin's Creed franchise with Origins and Odyssey respectively. But the good times would soon be coming to an end as we neared our current console generation, and I can pinpoint the exact moment when the tides began to turn for Ubisoft. Breath of the Wild came out in 2017 and basically revolutionized open world games in the same way Assassin's Creed did a decade earlier. Its sparse, streamlined approach had developers rushing to emulate it in no time flat. And Ubisoft, which spent so much of the last decade defining the open world game, was now playing catch up, as can be seen with 2020's Immortals Fenyx Rising. A game that I thought was alright, but very much a not Breath of the Wild, and honestly, it's pretty endemic to how Ubisoft has carried itself throughout this current console generation. X-Defiant was a failed not Call of Duty, Hyperscape was a failed not Apex, Skull and Bones was a failed attempt at a not Fortnite with boats? Maybe? I don't know what they were trying to do there. It still baffles me, the existence of that game. Compounding the issue is that their flagship franchises have either faced an identity crisis a la Far Cry 6 or just can't get it together with the Assassin's Creed games, though somehow Just Dance just keeps on trucking. As the failures compounded, the pressure grew more and more for its big open world games to deliver how they used to, which brings us to Avatar, Frontiers of Pandora, and Star Wars Outlaws. While Frontiers of Pandora came out before Star Wars Outlaws, I'm gonna start with Star Wars Outlaws because reasons. Outlaws was supposed to be the one that turned it around for Ubisoft. It was billed as the first truly open-world Star Wars game, and there was some hype for the game ahead of its release, largely because it marked the end of EA's monopoly on the wars. Yet, when it came out, reviews were mixed and the audience reaction was muted. So, I went into Outlaws with fairly muted expectations, and it more or less met them. If you've played any Ubisoft open-world game post-Assassin's Creed Origins, it more or less plays in that same vein. You play as Kay Vess, a thief in the Outer Rim who gets involved in one big job that inevitably goes wrong and gets her pinned with a death mark. So the core thrust of the game has Kay assembling a team, taking on various jobs for the gangs on the Outer Rim, and building up to this one big job that will score a massive payday and hopefully clear her name. The gameplay is serviceable across the board. The gunplay is fine, but nothing special. The space combat starts fun, but gets repetitive. Sabak is cool, but there's a lot of it, and the side missions are solid until they too become repetitive. Outlaws isn't terrible in any meaningful way, but it also doesn't have a standout feature or gameplay mechanic. The platforming elements are solid enough, but can't help but feel like a watered-down version of Uncharted. As a stealth-focused open-world game, it pales in comparison to Metal Gear Solid 5 and Kojima's Death Stranding games. And that really gets to the fundamental problem I had with Outlaws. It's fundamentally just a lesser version of so many other, more interesting games, and I was really hoping that would make up for these shortcomings with a really strong narrative, but nah. So I'm a really big Star Wars fan, not like the man-child perpetually crying about Disney and wokeness in Star Wars. I'm the grown-ass mankind who accepts that, sometimes Star Wars is good, sometimes it sucks, and I just try to take the dubs where I can get them. So in my 33 years, I've watched all the movies, plenty of the shows, played the games, read the books, and also read a lot of the comic books. And that part, the comics, played a large part into why I was just very underwhelmed by Outlaw's story. One of my big problems with Outlaws is that Kay Vess is not a very interesting character. And the entire time playing this game, I kept thinking to myself, why didn't they just make a Dr. Aphra game? Aphra is what I would lovingly call a piece of shit. She has never met a bridge she wouldn't burn, has very few loyalties, and is honestly one of the more fascinating outlaws in a galaxy far, far away. Outlaws would have been a perfect opportunity to bring Dr. Aphra to the masses because she doesn't really fit within what they're doing with the movies, but I think a game would be a wonderful showcase for that character. Well, Aphra is flawed and interesting. Conversely, Kay Vess is just a textbook Ubisoft protagonist. When it comes to Star Wars gaming protagonists, she has none of the pain or pathos of Cal Kestis, the aura of Revan, or even the cornball charm of Cal Katarn. She's just there. Kay Vess is an outlaw with a heart of gold, and that is such a boring, safe take, and that is fundamentally what's wrong with Outlaws. It's just a very safe game. At no point was I surprised in the story, at no point was I surprised in the gameplay. It just was very much by the numbers. And it's hard to recommend someone play a game that is basically just a game they've played 1,000 times before, but with a Star Wars coat of paint. Real talk, I may also have a more negative perception of the game because the long-winded mission structure is why it took me so long to make this video. I went into this thinking oh, I'm gonna beat it within this amount of time, and then the game just wouldn't shut the fuck up. The other larger knock I had against it is that I played Outlaws after finishing Frontiers of Pandora, and Outlaws borrows a lot of the design language from Frontiers of Pandora, but Frontiers of Pandora just does it way better in far more interesting ways. Avatar strangely had a lot going for it. By virtue of there being so few ways to engage with Avatar beyond the movies, an open world game set on Pandora was actually fairly novel. Frontiers of Pandora follows a group of Na'vi who were kidnapped from their tribe and were raised in human captivity. After eventually escaping in the opening hour of the game, you follow the Saren 2 as they rekindle with their culture and take the fight to the RDA. While the story isn't groundbreaking by any means, the gameplay fully nails that sense of wonder and discovery inherent to Pandora. Quite frankly, Frontiers of Pandora is a better Far Cry game than Far Cry 6. It takes a lot of the elements from those games and involves them in some fascinating ways, becoming in many ways the spiritual successor to Far Cry Primal. The addition of a third-person mode with the From the Ashes DLC intensifies the action and doesn't just add more content to the base game, but improves upon it. Frontiers of Pandora isn't a perfect game. It also suffers for some long-winded mission design in its late game, but damn it, it is some of the most fun I've had playing a Ubisoft open world game this console generation. And while I obviously dug it. It's incredibly bizarre that the best Ubisoft open world game this console generation isn't a Far Cry, isn't an Assassin's Creed, but the tie-in game for Avatar. How does that happen? Who makes that call? While Avatar Frontiers of Pandora did see a bit of a resurgence with the release of the From the Ashes DLC and the release of Avatar Fire and Ash, the game still underperformed Ubisoft sales expectations, and that's probably because the game was originally set to tie into Avatar The Way of Water, but came out a year later. The consistent lack of consumer interest in their games throughout this console generation has resulted in Ubisoft going through repeated layoffs and restructurings, most recently laying off, I want to say, like thousands of employees and dividing all the developers into 5 creative houses. While Ubisoft has said its new corporate structure is all about empowering developers to protect their brands and make development more efficient, I really don't think it's going to change anything because it's not addressing the key problem of Ubisoft's portfolio: overly safe games. I honestly feel like Ubisoft is just allergic to making interesting games anymore, because even when they do, in the case of something like Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, they don't invest in that team and try to, like, reconfigure the next game to more align with whatever financial expectations they have. No, they put out these games that are relatively small or should be small. Then when they don't meet their insane financial expectations, they just lay off the team or split them across into other developers and just completely throw out the baby with the bathwater. I'm really doubtful of the Guillemot family's ability to successfully steer Ubisoft out of this rut, because nothing in the last 6 or 7 years has shown that they know anything about, fostering really productive, creative environments and are interested in making games people actually give a shit about. They're not taking interesting chances. They're not pushing their genres forward in new ways. They're relying on formulas because that's what the market data tells them to do. And we've seen just about every company that's relying on that approach facing the same problem: people not giving a shit. Because yes, these ideas were cool when they were novel, but it's old hat. We've been eating the same shit for a decade. Of course people are going to want something new. Because even if we take a look at Ubisoft's new creative house structure, there's this focus on all these known brands, but there's very little about the one thing that probably would help them get out of this rut: new games, new IP, new brands. Like, think about some of the most integral brands in Ubisoft's portfolio, like Assassin's Creed and Far Cry. Those were original. Like, Far Cry 3 was, yes, a sequel, but what it did for that franchise was phenomenal. Same with Assassin's Creed 2. And it's like they're not even trying to build the new Assassin's Creed, the new Far Cry. And I don't mean a new sequel in those games. I mean new franchises that could potentially rise to the level of those games. So Ubisoft is probably cooked, but I do think there's hope on the horizon for indie and AA developers, because there's been a lot of cool stuff coming out of that space, and a lot of the modern successes have been games like Hollow Knight and Clair Obscur, and less in the traditional AAA space. And while I know it's easy to be like, oh yeah, the death of AAA, like, good, I don't think it's good for the industry at large, because they did provide jobs for talented developers and gave those people experience so that, they can go make their own AA company. I do think it's possible to just, build from the ground up something new, but it is a bit unfortunate that, so many people are losing their jobs, because at the end of the day, not everyone can make the next indie hit. For some folks, they're just SOL, and that doesn't feel good. And it's sad that the actions of developers or publishers like Ubisoft and EA and Xbox, Activision, whatever that loaded mess is, have led to this state of just more and more people losing their jobs and less people being interested in these games. So with that, I've been Joe. This has been Taste. I promise the next video is going to be coming out much sooner than it took for this one to watch. If you got this far, please consider giving a like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Love ya. Bye-bye.